So, welcome to Mill Valley Film Festival Contenders season. I'm Zoe Elton, and I'm very, very happy to welcome our guest, Jessica Kingdon, who's here with her film Ascension. Jessica, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your film. I think one of the things that really struck me about it is that you use imagery so beautifully in the film, and I found in recent years that I've seen fewer and fewer documentary films that have come from I'm going to say the notion of essentially visual storytelling. So could you tell me, who have been your inspirations in this kind of aesthetic that you are using so beautifully in your film?
Well, thank you for saying that about the film. Certainly, the visuals are one of the aesthetic elements that I was paying most close attention to and trying to prioritize in setting up the film. But I would say filmmakers such as Godfrey Reggio, which a lot of people, when they watch it, they tend to compare it to Coin Scotzi, I think because of the kind of stream of consciousness element that it has. Also films like Sweetgrass and Leviathan, that Lucy and Castig Taylor, and Michael Glawiger, who made Working Man's Death, which takes place also in vignettes and was one of the first documentaries I saw that was driven more conceptually rather than about story or character. Our Daily Bread by Nicholas Gerhalter about agriculture systems, and that film was also very aesthetically rigorous. So, and even earlier on, experimental filmmakers like Nathaniel Dorsky, who played a lot with rhythms and textures and images. So, yeah.
Well, that's a great heritage to be citing as your inspirations. It's great. And I think the other thing that really strikes me with your film is that it has that sense of visualness, but it also just it's very moving, sort of literally, and and in terms of your heart. And I think that's partly because you framed the film with your grandfather's poem. And it made me very curious about your grandfather. Did you know him? Was he a legend in your family? What's his story?
Yeah, so it's my great-grandfather
Oh, he's a
actually.
great grandfather, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It's confusing, and the story is a bit convoluted, but basically, I grew up hearing stories about my great-grandfather, Zhang Zi, who felt like a bit of it felt like a legend or a tall tale, because I would just hear stories about him as this famous poet in China during the Republican era. And it was said that he could read a huge book once and then recite the whole thing backwards afterwards. So I wasn't quite sure if he was a real, how much was exaggerated or not. But flash forward to me making this film Ascension, I was going to this city in Hunan province called Changsha, and I told my mother about it, and she mentioned that that's where my grandfather was from and great grandfather. And I didn't realize that because no one in my immediate family had been, besides my grandfather, of course. So I was pretty shocked, and I told one of my producers, Kira, who put me in touch with a scholar in that city. And that scholar was able to trace relatives that I didn't know that I had in that city. And within 2 days, they came and met me. And with them, they brought the head of the poet society that my great grandfather used to belong to. The reason why the scholar was able to find the relatives is because my great grandfather actually was this famous poet. And the president of the poet society he brought with him one of the books that my great-grandfather had published. And I didn't get to take it home with me because it belonged in this museum, but I got to see it. And months later, when we were trying to come up with a title of the film, we had been calling it Untitled PRC Project for a long time. I went and looked back at some of the of my great-grandfather's poetry, and one of them was called Ascension, and I just noticed kind of a resemblance, sort of an echoing of the poem, of the themes of the poem then and the themes of the film now, which is related to the paradox of progress, and that's how we got the title of it. And just to go into a little more detail about how I see them as related, in the poem Ascension, the narrator, who's presumably my great-grandfather, ascends to the height of a tower. And from this vantage point, he's able to see all of the invading territory and all of the chaos underneath him. And because this was 1912, it was the fall, it was the last dynasty in China, the last empire, the Qing dynasty that was falling. So it gave him great anxiety to see from this vantage point. And similarly, in today, we hope that class ascension will relieve our anxieties, but oftentimes it brings in other unintended consequences or struggles that we're not anticipating.
It's kind of amazing to me that you found, I mean, your grandfather's poem, first of all, but also just that moment in history that he was in has such an interesting resonance with this moment that we're in right now. I mean, it just, it's those cycles. And I guess in a way that sort of goes back to your, that sort of central theme of the paradox of progress.
Yeah, even though it's a completely different context, over 100 years later, there's still themes that resonate.
Yeah. Human beings don't necessarily get much further, even though we think we do, right?
Yeah, I would agree.
So did, you grew up in America, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and did you visit China did you visit family in China regularly? Not at all?
No, I didn't have any family that I knew about until making this film, because my grandparents fled in 1949 when the communists took over. It was said that they got on the last plane out and went to Taiwan. And then my mom grew up in Japan, so I didn't have any direct connection to China, and I had been interested in it for reasons of heritage, and also just trying to understand China as this global phenomenon, that it as a new world superpower that whose economic status changed so quickly. And so I was interested in looking at this culture that transformed so rapidly in just 30, 40 years, to understand what happens when a culture undergoes so much transformation. And I think a lot of universal questions are kind of magnified in contemporary China, just simply because of the compressed time frame in which they've transformed.
It is fascinating. And again, there's almost like a similar parallel to what was happening with America in the 20th century. That sort of that mid-century escalation of power and technology and communications and the whole, huge shift that happened, and its impact on the globe as well. And I was fascinated by some of the places that you found. So was this actually your first trip to China when you went for the film?
No, I had visited before, like as a tourist, basically.
Right, which is very different.
Very different. I made a short film in China called Commodity City.
Right.
Which takes place in Yiwu, which is the largest wholesale mall in the world. So I had some experience shooting in China.
And then, so this is an incredible group of places that you shoot in, you know, the places that you filmed. So you go there, you have a sense of what you're, you know, what you want to explore. What was the first location that you shot at?
It was actually the Butler School.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the first day of shooting was in the Butler School, which in some ways that was it's one of the most prominent locations in the film for sure, like one of the meatiest scenes.
Yeah.
But so it was kind of a lot to start it off that way, but it was also one of the easiest in terms of access, approach, understanding what we were doing and why we were doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's so clear. You say Butler School and it's kind of all in there.
Yes.
So part of it was logistically, it was one of the first places that I actually reached out to see if we could shoot there.
Yeah.
But part of it is I think it started the film off on this foot of like, this is what the film is about. It's like this new labor class that's created out of a new elite class in China, and looking at the kind of different levels of social class. So I think it started because the film is pretty nebulous and is kind of stream of consciousness in some ways. Starting it out on this very tangible aspect, I think, was helpful.
So did you have a sort of like a wish list of places that you wanted to find?
I called it a wish list, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a document and it would say wish list of places, and it was just sometimes very specific. Like I knew I wanted a plastic water bottle factory and a plastic water bottle recycling factory. Sometimes it was vague, something that had to do with the upper elite class, or something that had to do with leisure, like malls and shopping. So it really varied, but there was a wish list, and I would send it out to different fixers and field producers that we worked with throughout China. Some places already had connections to places. Some people had already had maybe pre-existing connections. Sometimes people would just cold reach out to dozens or even hundreds of locations before getting a single yes.
Wow.
So it was really an exercise in persistence. And I think also because in the film, I was open to a lot of different types of possibilities. I didn't go in with a very rigid or fixed mindset about what I needed. And because of that, you know, we were able to pivot to really to work with whoever was willing to let us in.
It's interesting because I feel like some of the places you find are surreal in many ways. I mean, it's like, how did you find the Star Boss entrepreneurial camp, for instance? I mean, that was quite a trip.
I'm trying to remember what I was saying, that I think it was kind of shooting in certain locations gave me ideas or opened up possibilities about what other types of places were out there. And I wouldn't have thought about a location like that starting off with the film.
Right.
We made 4 different trips to China to shoot, and each one was 5 or 6 weeks. And in between each shoot, I was able to edit and think about the other types of locations that I wanted. Originally, actually, I wanted the film to be more environmentally focused, more about pollution and waste. But as I was shooting, I found this sort of idea of this quest for upward mobility more present in the types of locations that I was in. It was just tangible everywhere. It was just people who were constantly trying to up level and become entrepreneurs. So it made sense to look for a type of school like that. But I wouldn't have known starting out that those types of things existed. And that one of our fixers, Jack Zhang, he found that for us. And I can't remember what exactly I said I was looking for, but it was something along those lines, and he found that.
Yeah, it's amazing, that whole
and
thing.
Then like the no, sorry to interrupt, but the manners school, the women etiquette, the women's business etiquette.
Is that the one was that the one where they practice Chinese smiles?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that was, again, kind of surreal. you know,
Yeah,
at one level, it's completely surreal. At another level, it kind of embodies something that is very familiar, you know?
so actually after I found that location and shot that, I discovered a scene that was very parallel to a scene from Frederick Wiseman's documentary, The Store, which takes place, I believe, in a Neiman Marcus in Dallas, Texas in the 80s. And
Oh,
in this scene, these female shopkeepers are being trained about how to smile properly in order to attract more customers. So when I saw that scene in the store, I felt like I was on the right track because I am trying to do something that is universal, that's not specific to China, but that's specific to this kind of global capitalism. So in that manner school, originally I was looking for something that had to do with a different finishing etiquette school for very wealthy women that I read about in the news. It's a school where they learn to eat a banana with a fork and a knife, and the course is $10,000 or something like that. But the head of the school wouldn't give me access. Maybe she got media wise or something, but she wouldn't grant me permission. So I put out this, in my wish list. I said I'm looking for a school like this, and this is what came back to me.
oh,
Our
interesting.
co-producer in China, Maggie Lee, found it. And that place was even better than what I had originally thought. It made sense for this film even more because it's manners in service of business explicitly, which
Yeah,
I thought was great.
yeah, yeah. It was fascinating. It was really fascinating. Um, did you? So the structure of the film really sort of, takes us up the ladder of I mean, the capitalist ladder, if you like, or the consumerist ladder. Did that structure evolve for you as you were making the film, or it sounds like it did a little bit from some of the things that you've said already? But was that how did that sort of reveal itself to you?
Yeah, it changed a lot because originally the idea was tracing the cycle of consumer goods, their production and manufacturing in factories. And then I was trying to look more at consumer culture, um, malls and shopping and things like that. And then looking at all of the waste and pollution that's a byproduct of all of this. But it became this more human story that had to do with, it's kind of a study of materialism.
Yeah, it's
And
fascinating. I mean, it would have been a very different film if you'd gone that route. I mean, I
yeah,
think it would have been, I'm going to say, in a way, almost more traditional. Just
yeah,
because I think that we,
more obvious, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I like that you took it in this direction.
Yeah, I was really responding to what the material was that I was getting and where the energy was. And
Mm, mm,
but in terms of the editing structure of ascending the class ladder, that really only came later, like
mhm.
after even an assembly of the film.
Yeah,
Um, only much later did I realize that the obvious answer is to, go up the class ladder. And yeah, I guess I realized sometimes the simplest solutions take the longest to find.
yeah, yeah. Do you? At what point did you start working with your composer? Dan,
Um,
right?
Dan Deacon, yeah, he is a performer, a musician, and also scores for film. And we worked together. I was lucky enough to work with him pretty early on in the process. It
Oh,
was after our first shoot, and we had only shot about like 20% or less of the movie.
mhm.
Um, and he saw some early scene selects and footage and immediately responded to it. And I think because he came on so early, we were able to have this very close collaboration where the film and the score could evolve together side by side.
Mm,
And he worked with raw audio recordings that my producer Nate and I would record in the field. Um, and he took it and repurposed them and manipulated the sounds, transcribed them, did all sorts of crazy things to these field recordings. And with a guided improv strings session. He turned that all into like this incredible score that I think really makes the film what it is.
Yeah, it feels very organic to the process. It feels like it, you know, it's like if you were a band, you would each be a musician in the band, you know. So, but yeah, it's a great. That sounds like a great collaboration. So you didn't actually know him before?
No, I kind of met him at Cinema Eye once.
Yeah.
I don't know if he would have remembered me from that, but randomly he actually saw Commodity City, my short film that I was talking about in Iwu,
Yeah.
because it played at the Maryland Film Festival in Baltimore, and Dan lives in Baltimore. And then my producer Nate kind of knew him and connected me with him.
Great.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think that I got lucky with the timing with the pandemic, because he was supposed to be on tour then, but because, you know, he had to postpone his tour, he had all this free time to do Zoom calls with me.
oh, great.
And I think, yeah, that kind of really, we had like a regular meeting time, and that regularity sort of helped snowball the score into something really essential to the film.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has sort of revealed a lot of different ways of being and ways of working for people. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're running out of time. So let me just ask you one last question. If you were to do an American version of this, where would be some of the places you might seek out in the United States to film?
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting question. And it's something that I've been thinking about. Like, if I were to make an American version, what would that look like? Since in some ways it's a country in decline as well. So I don't know if I could make exactly a parallel version of it. But I think a lot of the gig economy, there's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah.
In terms of freelancers, I don't know like how I could visualize that so interestingly though. Also lifestyle bloggers, maybe like hashtag van life kind of people.
Yeah.
You know, like people who sort of survive on corporate sponsorship ads.
Like most nonprofits, right?
Oh yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
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 Agriculture, a lot of farming. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, I haven't thought about it enough.
No, I mean, that was just really, I was just interested in a spontaneous sort of response, because obviously, you know, when you made Ascension, it sounds like you were very, very open to where the journey, you know, both sort of the literal and figurative journey was going to lead you. And that's kind of a, you know, a fascinating way of working with it.
And I think in some ways I had the benefit of being outsider, which put me in that beginner's mindset. And when you're in a beginner's mindset, you are more open to the possibilities. But when you're steeped in the everyday and the familiar, it's harder to have that distance and kind of see things with clear eyes.
Yeah. Well, that's a great thought for us to take in conclusion. So, Jessica, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you again for your film. It's really beautiful work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Great to have you here. Thank you. Take care.
Take care.